When Clint Eastwood sat in her section, she had no idea her world was about to turn upside down. Mia adjusted her apron, glancing at the clock above the diner's counter. It was nearing 7 p.m., the time when the dinner rush usually tapered off, leaving a slower pace to wind down her shift. For most, the little diner tucked off the highway was just a pit stop, a place to grab a meal before continuing their journey. For Mia, it was her lifeline. At 28, she balanced long hours here with raising her 6-year-old son, Jordan. Each tip and every paycheck went toward keeping their modest apartment and paying for Jordan's growing list of school supplies. She moved gracefully from table to table, her warm smile a shield against the exhaustion clawing at her. The regulars knew her story, or parts of it. A few would slip an extra $1 or $2 when they could, but Mia never asked for sympathy. She had learned early on that the world wasn't fair, and her only choice was to keep moving forward. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Mia's attention. She looked up, expecting another road-weary traveler. Instead, a man walked in with a quiet confidence that made the air in the room feel heavier. He wore a simple button-up shirt and jeans, his weathered face partially hidden by a hat pulled low. It took her a moment, but when he glanced her way, she knew exactly who he was, Clint Eastwood. Her breath hitched. She wasn't one to fawn over celebrities, she didn't have the time or energy for it. But this was different. Clint Eastwood was an icon, someone her late father used to talk about while they watched old westerns together. For a brief second, memories of those moments flickered in her mind, but she didn't have time to dwell. Clint settled into a corner booth, and Mia knew it was her turn to serve him. But this wasn't just another customer, and something about his quiet presence made her pulse quicken. Mia grabbed her notepad and pen, took a deep breath, and approached the booth. As she got closer, she noticed the subtle details, his hands, slightly weathered but steady, resting on the table, the piercing eyes beneath the brim of his hat that seemed to see everything without giving much away. He looked up as she stopped beside him, his expression calm, almost unreadable. "Good evening," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "What can I get started for you?" He glanced at the menu briefly before setting it aside. "Just a coffee and a burger, medium rare, no onions." Simple enough. Mia jotted it down, but she couldn't ignore the faint tremor in her hand as she turned to leave. Clint's voice stopped her. "Busy night?" She turned back to him, surprised. Most customers didn't bother with small talk unless they were regulars. "Not too bad," she replied, smiling faintly. "Keeps me on my toes." He nodded, his expression softening just slightly. "You've got a good pace. Not easy to keep up in a place like this." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Was he complimenting her? Clint Eastwood, a man she'd only ever seen in movies, was noticing her work ethic. She managed a polite smile before retreating to the counter to put in his order, but her mind raced with questions. Why was he here, in this tiny diner off the highway? He could afford the fanciest restaurants in California, yet here he was, sipping water from a chipped glass, waiting for a burger like any other traveler. When the order was ready, Mia carried the plate and coffee to his table. She set them down carefully, catching a brief appreciative glance from him. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," she replied, trying to sound casual, but she couldn't help feeling like this moment, this ordinary interaction, was somehow different. As she moved to serve other tables, she noticed he wasn't in any rush to eat. He sat there almost contemplative, occasionally sipping his coffee. But why did it feel like he wasn't just here to eat? Something about his presence lingered in the back of her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from ordinary. Mia kept herself busy refilling coffee cups, clearing tables, and taking new orders, but she couldn't help glancing toward Clint's booth every so often. He ate slowly, almost methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. Occasionally their eyes met, and he'd give her a polite nod, a silent acknowledgement that made her stomach flutter. After finishing his meal, Clint gestured to her with a slight raise of his hand. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, careful to keep her expression composed. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice steady. Perfect, he said with a small smile. That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time. She chuckled lightly, the compliment catching her off guard. Well, I'll let the cook know. He'll appreciate hearing that. For a moment, Clint didn't say anything. He simply looked at her, and in that brief silence, it felt like he was studying her, not in a judgmental way, but with a kind of curiosity that made her feel exposed, yet oddly seen. You've got a good energy about you, he said finally. You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. Was this a compliment? A memory? She couldn't tell. Well, thank you, she managed, her cheeks warming. I just try to get through the day like everyone else. He nodded, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. That's the trick, isn't it? Just getting through. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. He placed them on the table along with a folded piece of paper. Keep the change, he said, standing up. And read this when you get a moment. Mia stared at the note, her heart pounding. Thank you, she said softly, unsure if he even heard her as he walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled as he left, and just like that, he was gone. For a few moments, she stood frozen by the booth, staring at the note as if it might burn her fingers. What could he have possibly written? And why did he seem so intent on her reading it? But the questions would have to wait. There were still tables to serve, and Mia wasn't the type to leave her duties unfinished, even if her mind was racing with anticipation. By the time Mia cleared Clint's booth, the diner had quieted down. The last of the evening's customers were sipping their coffee or chatting softly, and the background hum of the jukebox filled the room. She picked up the folded note with trembling fingers, slipping it into her apron pocket as she finished cleaning the table. She wasn't sure why she felt so anxious. It was just a note, right? Once her shift was over, Mia slipped into the back room to collect her things. Her curiosity finally got the better of her, and she pulled out the paper, carefully unfolding it. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and her breath hitched. Dear Mia, I don't know much about you, but in the short time I've been here, I've seen something rare, true resilience. Watching how you manage this place with grace, even under pressure, is a reminder of how much strength exists in the everyday heroes of this world. You remind me of someone very dear to me, someone who taught me the value of hard work and kindness. I don't know your story, but I can see in your eyes that you've carried more than your share of burdens. That's why I want to do something, no strings attached. Mia's hands began to shake as she continued reading. I'm leaving a small gesture for you to use however you see fit, whether it's for your child, your future, or simply a moment of rest. I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen, and I see you. Folded inside the note was a check. Mia's heart nearly stopped when she saw the amount, $10,000. Her knees buckled, and she sat down hard on the bench in the back room, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just the money, though, that was life-changing in itself. It was the words, the acknowledgement, the feeling that someone as accomplished and legendary as Clint Eastwood had taken the time to notice her, to care for someone who often felt invisible in the world. It was overwhelming. But even as she tried to process it all, one question remained: why her? And what was she going to do with this unexpected gift? Mia sat in the back room for what felt like hours, her mind swirling with emotions. The check in her hands felt surreal, like something out of a dream. She thought about the bills stacked on her kitchen counter, the second-hand sneakers her son, Jordan, had been wearing for months, and the leaky faucet in their tiny apartment that she couldn't afford to fix. This money could change so much. But beyond the financial relief, Clint's words lingered in her mind. You remind me of someone very dear to me. Who was that person? And what had made Clint Eastwood, of all people, see something in her? It wasn't just the money or the note, it was the way he had looked at her, with a kind of respect and recognition that she hadn't felt in years. Mia wiped her tears and took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself, so she called her best friend, Tasha, who had been her rock through countless struggles. Within minutes, Tasha was at the diner, sitting across from Mia in one of the empty booths. Wait, Tasha said, holding up her hands as Mia handed her the note. You're telling me Clint Eastwood left you this? Mia nodded, her eyes still puffy from crying. I don't even know why. I didn't do anything special. Tasha read the note silently, her eyes widening with each word. When she got to the check, she let out a low whistle. Girl, this is insane. Do you know what this could mean for you and Jordan? I know, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it doesn't feel real. Why would someone like him care about someone like me? Tasha reached across the table and grabbed Mia's hands. Because he saw you, Mia. He saw what I've seen all along. You work harder than anyone I know, and you never let life break you. People notice that kind of strength. Mia stared down at the check, her heart heavy with gratitude but also with doubt. What if I don't deserve it? What if this is some kind of mistake? It's not a mistake, Tasha said firmly. You do deserve it. The question is, what are you going to do with it? But that was the question, wasn't it? And as much as Mia wanted to celebrate, she couldn't ignore the weight of this unexpected gift or the responsibility that came with it. That night, Mia sat at her kitchen table long after Jordan had gone to bed, the note and check laid out in front of her. The small apartment was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old pipes, and the dim light above the table flickered faintly. Her thoughts ran in 1,000 directions. This money could pay their overdue rent, replace the unreliable car she depended on, and give Jordan opportunities she could only dream of until now. But as exciting as the possibilities were, they also scared her. She picked up the note again, reading Clint's words for the 10th time, I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen, and I see you. Those words struck a chord deeper than she'd expected. How many years had she spent trying to stay afloat, working double shifts, skipping meals so Jordan could have enough? She'd pushed herself to the brink of exhaustion so many times, she'd lost count. And through it all, she'd felt invisible, like the world didn't care whether she made it or not. But Clint Eastwood had seen her. He'd seen her struggle, her determination, her resilience. And in that moment, she realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about believing that she was worthy of something better. Mia thought about her father, who had always been her biggest cheerleader. Before he passed, he used to say, "Don't let the world wear you down, kid. You've got a fire in you." For the first time in years, she felt that fire flicker again. She pulled out a notepad and began scribbling ideas, things she could do with the money. Maybe she could finally take a class in accounting, a career she'd always dreamed of but had never had the time or resources to pursue. Maybe she could set up a small college fund for Jordan, giving him a chance at a better future. But one thought kept returning louder than the rest, paying it forward. Clint's gesture had changed her life, and she couldn't ignore the idea of doing the same for someone else. Still, the uncertainty lingered. The road ahead felt overwhelming, but for the first time in a long time, Mia allowed herself to hope. Morning sunlight streamed through the window as Mia stood in the kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee and watching Jordan play with his action figures on the worn-out carpet. The check-in note still rested on the table, now folded neatly. After a sleepless night of reflection, she had made her decision. She called Tasha first, who immediately offered to watch Jordan for the afternoon. Mia explained that she needed some time to sort things out, and Tasha didn't ask any questions. She just said, "You do what you need to do, girl. I've got you." With Jordan happily settled at Tasha's house, Mia drove to the bank. The check felt heavy in her purse, its presence almost too surreal to believe. The bank teller, a young woman with a bright smile, raised an eyebrow when she saw the amount. "That's quite a deposit," the teller said, her tone polite but curious. Mia nodded, offering a small smile. "It's a gift." The teller didn't press further, and Mia felt a small wave of relief as the check cleared. She felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, excitement, and an almost crushing sense of responsibility. This money wasn't just for her, it was a chance to rewrite her story and give Jordan a better life. After leaving the bank, Mia made her way to a local community college. For years, she had walked past its campus, wondering what it would feel like to sit in a classroom again, to learn, to grow. She stepped inside, her hands trembling as she approached the admissions desk. A kind-faced woman greeted her and asked how she could help. "I'd like to enroll," Mia said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "In accounting." The woman smiled warmly. "You're in the right place. Let's get you started." As Mia filled out the paperwork, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about showing Jordan that it was never too late to chase your dreams, no matter how impossible they might seem. But as Mia walked out of the admissions office, a new thought struck her: what if this was only the beginning? What if Clint's gesture wasn't just a gift, but a spark to light a much bigger flame? Weeks turned into months, and the changes in Mia's life were nothing short of transformative. She balanced her shifts at the diner with evening classes at the community college, and while it wasn't easy, there was a newfound determination in her stride. Jordan noticed too. He'd proudly tell his friends, "My mom's going to college." Mia couldn't help but smile every time she heard it. But it wasn't just her own life that Mia wanted to change. Inspired by Clint's gesture, she began setting aside a portion of the money for a small fund to help others in her community. Whether it was a struggling single parent needing groceries or a student unable to afford textbooks, Mia quietly stepped in, giving back in ways that Clint's note had encouraged her to. One evening, as Mia flipped through her accounting textbook at the kitchen table, Jordan tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he asked, his big brown eyes curious, "do you think that man will ever come back to the diner?" Mia paused, the thought catching her off guard. Would Clint Eastwood ever return? She didn't know, but his impact on her life was something she would carry forever. "Maybe," she said softly, ruffling Jordan's hair. "But even if he doesn't, he's always going to be part of our story." And that was the truth. Clint's gesture had reminded Mia of the power of kindness, of seeing someone for who they are, and lifting them up when the world felt heavy. It had reignited her belief in herself, in the possibilities of life, and in the importance of paying it forward. As Mia closed her textbook and prepared for bed that night, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was thriving, one step at a time. And so, the next time a stranger entered her section at the diner, Mia greeted them with the same warmth and grace, knowing that sometimes even the smallest interactions could change a life forever. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the potential to create ripples far beyond what we can see. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration today.